Happy Mid-Autumn Festival. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your morning to listen to my talk, especially on a holiday. I'm super grateful that you all are here.
Dr. EE, modern medicine has made huge amounts of progress, but when it comes to our health, prevention is always better. Can you tell us more about this?
Right. So, health comes before everything else. Without health, there's no happiness, no wealth, and no life worth living. What's the point of having a long life and all the money in the world if you don't have the health to enjoy it? So, when it comes to our health, prevention is better than a cure. There's two types of people in the world: those who get their car regularly serviced, and those who wait until they hear the engine grinding, and then they just keep on driving until they don't have a choice but to tow it to a mechanic. So far too many people, there's just been this sort of cycle of panic and then regret when it comes to health. It's like waiting to fix a hole in the roof until clouds are overhead and it's already starting to rain. So prevention doesn't receive as much limelight as a cure. People tend to feel like a cure is more important or effective because the results are super clear. Prevention also isn't an exact science, so watching someone never get a disease to begin with is just not very exciting. It doesn't make very much of an impact. So people, they tend to wait until they have a problem and then they try to find ways to fix it. But when it comes to our health, we don't want these problems to begin with. Otherwise, it's a perpetual game of cat and mouse. And we've all seen Tom and Jerry, right? The mouse always wins. Many of us have been taught from young that when we're sick, we just have to go to the doctors. They'll fix you and you'll be fine. So prevention, it doesn't receive as much limelight, doesn't receive as much attention as a cure. It's just how people work. Even in TV shows, all the TV shows out there, all the medical TV shows, if they focused it on, oh, you know, Mr. So and so comes in, he ate a healthy diet, he never got sick, never gets heart disease, and then the episode ends. It's boring, right? It's always, someone comes in an ambulance and then the doctors do all their work and then magically the person is well again. That's exciting. So, it's all about the cure and less about the prevention. So what we really want to focus on is focusing more about the prevention. For example, if just let me make another metaphor. If you have a software developer who writes perfect code to begin with, so he's preventing problems to begin with, then as they're sitting there to their boss, it just seems like they're sitting around doing nothing because they did it right the first time. So there's nothing to keep working on, nothing to fix. But if they didn't write it well to begin with, if they're always running into problems, then the problems will keep coming up. But to their boss, they seem like an invaluable employee because they're sitting there and they're always working and they're always fixing problems, right? But we don't want to fall into that trap. We don't want these problems to begin with. So why is prevention better than a cure? There's a lot of reasons why. So let me go through them. The first one is hospital infections. Let's take a look at these infections. Now, hospital-acquired infections are the ones that you get inside of a hospital, the ones you get from the hospital. Now, these infections are often worse than the ones you get in the community or outside of the hospital. This is because hospitals are actually really, really good breeding grounds for antibiotic-resistant bacteria. So the bugs you pick up in a hospital, they tend to be resistant to antibiotics and they tend to cause more severe infections. They affect about 5 to 10% of all hospitalized patients. According to the CDC, about 1.7 million each year pick up a hospital-acquired infection, and about 99,000 will die because of this infection. So for those unlucky people, you could say that going to a hospital was actually their downfall. And a misdiagnosis does happen. So let's take a look at some of the more common ones. The most common mistake is actually drug error, and it harms at least 1.3 million people each year. According to the FDA, about 7,000 die each year from medication error. So just think about it. Some of these medication names, they sound super similar, or they can be very complicated. Some drugs will also have multiple names referring to the same medication. For example, paracetamol and acetaminophen, they're the same medication. But then you also have to take in the brand names as well, like Panadol or Tylenol. It's all the same medication, but there's so many different names to refer to it. Now, errors, they're a part of human life. It's part of being human. Doctors, nurses, people who work in hospitals, they're only human. For example, when you're busy, stressed, lacking sleep, you're just trying to get through your day and see as many people as possible. A lot of the drugs now are dispensed using computer systems as well. So you can type in the drug, you can select it from a menu. Maybe you clicked on the wrong thing. Maybe you just entered the first few letters of the names and picked the ones that looked about right. Maybe you got the dosage wrong. Maybe you prescribed it weekly instead of daily. Maybe you mishear a drug name. Sometimes instead of writing down the full name, all you get is an abbreviation. So, there's a lot of ways that these mistakes can happen. You can also get duplicates given, like the same drug has the same effect, or you have two different drugs, but they have the same effect and the person's on both. It's all sorts of these little things that fall through the cracks. So 1/3 of all Americans use more than 5 medications. 1 in 5 Americans have experienced medication error. So out of the 5% of hospitalized patients, they will experience this medication error inside the hospital. One study suggests that over 180,000 people will die each year due to these sorts of errors. Right, so another really common error are just scans. Scans can be interpreted incorrectly. So some changes on a scan are super, super subtle, which means that if you're not specifically looking for it, you'll probably miss it. Or you might see something that you think is, not a problem, benign, but it's actually something serious, or you might just miss it entirely. The right test might reveal an underlying illness, just might never have been ordered by the physician, or the results might just have been interpreted incorrectly. So how common is misdiagnosis? Every year, there is an average of about 12 million people in the United States who are misdiagnosed. Autopsy data suggests a major misdiagnosis is made 10 to 20% of the time, which is much, much higher than we ever want to hear. So about 28% of misdiagnoses are life-threatening or life-changing. Over 100,000 people die or are permanently disabled each year. So it can be deceptively easy to misdiagnose someone. For example, if you have someone, a young, healthy man with no other health problems, and they have a headache, most of the time it is perfectly fine and it's just a headache. I don't want to scare anyone. But in a tiny, tiny, tiny minority of cases, it can be something more serious, like bleeding in the brain or something else going on. But because of our preconceptions, because the majority of the time it is just nothing serious. It's these sort of things that are missed because you're not looking for it. And if you're not looking for something like that, it's really easy to miss it. So what happens then is that, people will then think, oh, then why don't you do something like a test? But then blood tests can't uncover everything. Now, there are these institutions that will do these checkups yearly, every year, and it's good to have a checkup done every year, even if you're perfectly well, just to catch anything that might be going on. But when you're doing these sort of checkups, you can't just think, oh, I'll just do every test underneath the sun, because it doesn't work like that. All right. So for example, when I was doing my own yearly checkup, they'll offer me all sorts of these excessive blood tests. And I feel like, because I have the background knowledge to know which ones to pick so I don't sort of, spend all this extra money for unnecessary tests. I just want to share this all with you. So a lot of these extra tests that they can offer to you or charge you for are things like tumor markers. And they'll be like, oh, on the surface, it sounds like a really good idea. Oh, I'll just do all these tests and, hopefully it shows nothing. But on the off chance it does, then I'm good, right? Right? So that is, it's not really, it's not, that's not really the best idea. So for example, one of the more common tumor markers is things like CA125. And I've seen cases where they have done this test on a man. Now, for these sort of tests, what you're really looking for are female reproductive system issues like ovarian cancer. Okay, it's not really any use on a man. But the thing about these sort of tumor markers is that the name is also very misleading. People think that it's a marker for a tumor, and often it is used as a marker for a tumor, but it can also increase in other situations as well. For example, CA125 can fluctuate during your menses. It can go up if you have endometriosis, or alpha fetoprotein. It's another sort of tumor marker people use. It can also go up in cases like liver cirrhosis or hepatitis. And then people will see these results and they get scared and they go like, oh my God, do I have a tumor? Is there something wrong? And it leads down that road of anxiety and all sorts of extra tests just to make sure that, oh, it's not actually something scary causing it to go up. All right. So for these sort of blood tests, you need to exercise a bit of discretion when it comes to them, especially when it comes for things like tumor markers. So tumor markers are not something that you use on people just willy-nilly. You should use it when people are, in a higher risk group, or you have a reason to suspect that they may have had something go wrong. It's not something that you do on someone who is young and perfectly healthy, who you have no reason to suspect that they may have a tumor. So it's something that you use when you already have that suspicion, or someone who already has cancer and you know it, and you can use it to help track it. So, if it goes higher, if it goes lower. So it's not something that you have to order if you are young and perfectly healthy, you're not in any sort of risk group, because then, it can just cause a lot of unnecessary anxiety. Now, people also think that these sort of tests are super accurate, but they're not. They have this idea of, oh, I'm just going to go to the doctor. The doctor is going to do all these tests and they're going to find everything that is wrong with me. But lab tests are not 100% accurate. So whenever we create a test to screen for a disease, to detect an anomaly, or to measure some sort of physiological parameter like blood pressure, we have to determine how valid that test is. Does it measure what it sets out to measure accurately? And there are a lot of factors that combine to describe how valid a test is, like sensitivity and specificity. Now, these are two such factors. We often think of sensitivity and specificity as being ways to indicate the accuracy of a test or a measure. Now, sensitivity is the ability of a test to correctly identify patients with a disease, and specificity is the ability of a test to correctly identify people who do not have a disease. So ideally, what we really want are tests with high percentages in both of these. But what we find when we go through all of these really common tests that people go for is that, some of these tests are better at one than the other. All right, so not all tests are perfectly accurate. So, the other factor is also that doctors cannot just, blindly mass order diagnostic tests. Now, diagnosis is hard to do because, after all, doctors are also human and we're not gods. So to have a right diagnosis, your doctor has to be able to guess right, because they're the ones to prescribe a test and they're the ones that have to choose the right ones to perform. A lot of people think that lab tests or investigations are what give the diagnosis, but how it really works is that the doctors should already have a good idea of what your diagnosis is just from talking to you, from getting your medical history and doing their initial, physical examination. The further tests are there to confirm their diagnosis, to confirm what they think you already have. So they should have an idea